And self-observation is a self-correcting mechanism. I don't have to change anything that I observe. I don't judge what I observe. I don't try to change it. I just watch, like wind and water on stone. Slowly, slowly, wind and water wear away stone. The ego structure, which calls itself me, I, is there for a very important reason. It's not the enemy. It is a food source for the being to grow and evolve.
You've reached the Intuition Incubator, a place to cultivate and connect with your inner knowing. I'm your host, Abby Haverman. In a left-brain obsessed, digitally distracted world, I guide seasoned executives to effortless success by quieting their intellect to hear their wisdom. This is your invitation to plug into the part of you that knows, to lead from within, and to find clarity in the chaos. All right, it's time to incubate your intuition. Welcome back to the Intuition Incubator. Today's episode is super, super special. I am honored and privileged to have Red Hawk here with me. Welcome, Red Hawk.
Thank you, Abby. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here.
Now, as I would introduce you to the audience, I would call you a master. But I have a feeling from having read your books, that's not how you refer to yourself. What would you call yourself?
Well, that's the right thing to introduce immediately because I am no master, I am no guru, and I am no teacher. I am an ordinary man. I am an ordinary practitioner, just like you. And I am one who struggles to remember himself, just like you. And I have been given a certain position in this work by my master, Mr. Lee Lozowick. And I assume this position reluctantly. And that is the position that I was given by Mr. Lee was to introduce people to the practice of presence, which is self-remembering and self-observation. And he gave me that task, number one, because he thought it would be very, very beneficial to me personally and to my work. That may be the only reason he put me in this position. But when he assigned me the task to write the book, Self-Observation, he said to me, it should be a book which is brief and to the point. It should be a book which would help. There would be help in it for someone who had never been introduced to this work before. Mm. And there should be help in this book for someone who has been doing this work for many years. Mm-hmm. That's the position he put me in. I find myself being asked to go all over the world to do self-observation intensives. And I go reluctantly. And I go with well, you see, I understand very well that the mammal mind is looking for an alpha male or an alpha female to lead the herd. And whoever they put in that position, they begin to make an image out of them. Mm. And they begin to bow down to them and make an idol out of them, and they worship that idol, and they miss the teaching altogether, and they begin to worship the messenger. That's the position I find myself in. And it's a very, very awkward position. So I always say to people in the very beginning, do not trust me. Do not believe me. Find out for yourself what's true. Verify for yourself. The only thing that you can believe absolutely is your personal experience. You must trust that. Do not trust me. If I say something that's valuable, that resonates in you, immediately begin to investigate there. Experiment, search, question, and find out for yourself. So, Abby, thank you very much for introducing that problem immediately. The problem is that mammals are suggestible, and that they are herd animals and that they follow the leader blindly, even if he leads them over the cliff.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love that. And I'm going to ask you more about this issue of not believing everything you said, but later in the interview. And yes, gosh.
We see in our own, in this very time, we see in our, let's take our political process. We see people blindly, without question, following, and without any experience, without any knowledge, blindly accepting as fact and true whatever the alpha says.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's mammal behavior.
Yes. Yeah. And I love, and even these people who you've had, I mean, what you're saying is even people who we've had experiences with that have really been eye-opening and has been amazing. And maybe I've learned a lot, from doing this work and all of these things. Even then, and I say this actually in the intro to the Intuition Incubator, the hierarchy. And I know I've spoken with my teacher in the work. The hierarchy doesn't exist. We are all the same, right? We are all one. And so where you are on your path, I may see as a master, but the moment that I begin to elevate you, I'm missing what you're teaching. That's what you're saying.
Immediately.
Right?
Immediately. The minute I create an image of this person and assign a label or a position, immediately I've already missed. I'm already off the path.
Because I'm in
It doesn't mean I can't learn from you, Abby, and you can learn from me, because this work requires that we work with others, not just alone. So we learn from each other. We help each other. And what you have, one piece that you have may be a piece that I'm missing, and a piece I have may be a piece you're missing. But then the moment that piece comes to me, I have to begin to verify it for myself. I have to test it. I have to find out for myself.
Right. So let's start. Can you tell us what is the work? What is the work?
Well, I'm glad we have all day.
I was going to say, I can't wait to hear how he answers this.
I'm going to start with something very simple and rudimentary. When we are born into a society in which everyone, without exception, is identified with their body. And the body is a mammal. The human body is a mammal body, subject to all the laws which mammals are subject to. And that means that the mammal law is that the individual mammal is a herd animal. All herd animals are driven by the same laws. One, they follow the herd blindly, without question, as a survival mechanism. The moment an individual mammal is separated from the herd, that mammal is prey and will be killed and eaten by predators. So to be isolated from the herd is the worst thing that can happen to a mammal. So we will do anything to go along with the herd, be accepted in the herd, and be identified as the herd. Second, all mammals are the law is they must have a leader. No mammal thinks for himself. All mammals are herd animals, and the herd thinks for me. The herd acts for me, and the herd acts in my name, and I will follow the herd and do whatever the herd says. Okay, so we're born into a herd. We call it a family or a society. And the first thing that we're taught, and we're taught this from the very beginning, is by well-meaning people who mean to help us. They teach us, you have a soul. This is wrong teaching. This is bad teaching. and immediately it puts us on the wrong foot. It's a lie. We don't have a soul. The truth is, I am a soul. But the moment you teach a child you have a soul, very, very early, one of the first things the child learns is the difference between having and being. You have a shoe. You have a doll. You have a toy. The child very, very early learns the difference. If you say I have, the child recognizes I am not this thing. I'm not this shoe. I am not this toy. I own this toy. This toy is not me. So when we're taught you have a soul, the child immediately understands I'm not this thing that's called a soul. And the child can't see the soul, can't feel the soul, can't understand the soul. And so immediately that information goes into a box and closed off and means nothing to the child. And the child begins to identify itself with what it can see and feel, which is the body. Oh. All right. So we are identified from the very beginning with something which we believe is me. I am this. That's identification. What we don't understand is that I am a soul. And I am a soul in this body temporarily. That's very different than I have a soul. I am a soul. If that is the teaching the child receives, the child has a whole different view of life and the body and the world. What the work teaches us is that Earth is a school for flawed souls. All who come here with a flaw.
A flaw?
With a flaw, FLAW.
Okay.
We bring this flaw in with us. The work calls this flaw chief feature. Right. I call it blind spot. Same thing. The flaw is so much a part of me that I cannot see it. I believe it is me. I act as if it were me, and it becomes the doer. It becomes the thinker. It becomes the actor, this flaw. There are hundreds of different kinds of flaws. Yours may be different than mine. But they all can be boiled down to the same thing. All flaws are fear-based.
Yeah,
which means,
so
yeah.
For the audience, I want to break down a couple of things. I mean, so, and I'll circle back to some of the things you said before, but the chief feature, the flaw, 'cause I've been thinking about this, right? I've been, I know that it's a process that you kind of are watching and it's revealing itself. But these chief features could be things like, I mean, the ones that I'm playing with, I guess, are self-loathing and impotence. These are like two big ones that I see in my inner world, but they could be self-importance, which I'm also looking at. It could be, right? They're these, those are examples, right? Of what vanity would be another one, right?
All of the sudden deadly sins are chief features. It could be Pollyannish. Everything is beautiful. Everything is okay. I love the world and the world loves me. It doesn't have to be negative. Okay. It can be anything. So it could be fear. It could be anger. It could be punishment. It could be abuse.
Or victimhood.
Victimhood, absolutely. It could be the abuser or it could be the abused. It could be money, sex, power, fame.
Okay.
There are many, many, many possibilities.
But you come in with one and it colors everything and it drives you through life without you knowing it.
It calls itself me.
Mm-hmm.
I. And it is the force around which all of the other various small I's in me gather. It is the blending force which controls all of my thinking, all of my emotions, all of my actions, and I don't know it, I don't see it, and I don't believe it if somebody points it out to me. Oh, they're all wrong. They don't really know me at all. How could they say that about me? Mm-hmm. Other people see it, I don't see it. This flaw, which is fear-based, amounts to one thing: my. Not thy will, my will. So when Jesus gives this beautiful teaching, not my will, thy will be done. I struggled with that teaching for years. How do I know what the will of God is? Well, this work is about the awakening of conscience in me. Mm. Because all of us are born with a mustard seed of conscience. And I'm not saying conscious, I'm saying conscience. I'm not saying consciousness. I'm not saying conscious. I'm saying conscience. That which always points towards the right or the good or love. In me. Everyone has it.
But most people would say, as they're listening to you right now, they'd be like, well, I have more than a mustard seed of conscience. I have a conscience. It's these other people that don't have a conscience.
And what they would say is, I know the difference between right and wrong.
Yes.
Then they would say, that's conscience. Okay, that's not conscience, that's morality. Everyone is born into a milieu in which the morality of that milieu is pressed upon us and influences us and drives us. So what's right and wrong differs from person to person.
Right.
What's right and wrong differs from neighborhood to neighborhood. If you're born on the east side of Los Angeles, what's right and wrong is different if you're born in Beverly Hills. If you're born in Arkansas, what's right and wrong is different than if you're born in New York City. If you're born in America, what's different is if the difference between right and wrong is different than if you're born in Russia or Iran or Mexico or Sweden. Morality differs from place to place and person to person. Conscience is the same everywhere and in everyone, because conscience is the will of God in me, and it is weak, and it must be developed and strengthened so that the connection between me and conscience grows strong, and conscience becomes a positive, motivating force in me. And that takes years and years of practice. It means the work is about seeing what in me refuses the will of God, conscience, what's right. Conscience always points towards love. The self is always fear-based.
I want to break this down for a moment because, and I hope you don't mind if I just pop in every now and then to break
perfectly all right
down a little, because I think this is just such an important point. And you gave many, many examples. Many other examples that people can relate to, of course, are, you know, what political party you're on. You have a different idea of right and wrong. And, you know, when I just started this work, my husband and I went down the rabbit hole one night on this, and we started talking about it. And I was like, well, Hitler had an idea of what was right and what was wrong. That was his idea of what was right or wrong. And I think when we bring things to that level, you know, like these people in history who have, you know, committed crimes or done things that we think as a collective, we can all agree, well, there's a limit, right? Like there's a limit to right and wrong. Like we would all agree that that's wrong, except Hitler and his followers wouldn't agree that that's right or wrong. So you would have to say that they wouldn't say that what he did was wrong. They would say what he did was right. So you would have to say that that's also not conscience the way that you're talking about conscience, right? Because literally what you're saying is if there is a right or wrong and you are talking and you are believing that conscience relates to a right or wrong, no matter how egregious the right or the wrong may feel, that's not the type of conscience that you're referring to. Is that correct?
What you refer to when you talk about Hitler is a moral system, not conscience. So here's how conscience works in me. And this is what I've discovered over years and years of observation. One, conscience has no negative side. It never judges. It never condemns. It never criticizes. Conscience always only points towards the goodness in me. Conscience is like a moral compass. It always points towards true north. And what is true north? In the terms of conscience, it's a non-judgmental love. It's the love of God, which is objective, which is without conditions.
Which is completely foreign to how we grow up thinking about what a conscience is.
Correct. And so it has no negative side. So it doesn't condemn or criticize. It doesn't speak. It only feels. Conscience is and that's why it's called still. It's a still, small. It's called a voice. It's not a voice that is like speaking. It's a voice which is a feeling, and so when I violate conscience, when I go against love, conscience suffers. It only suffers. It doesn't condemn. And its suffering is called remorse. When conscience suffered, it's called remorse of conscience. And I can tell you from my experience, Abby, that remorse is a transformative agent. It's divine. It comes from above. It changes my heart because remorse is unbearable pain and suffering. Until I correct my course, remorse is unbearably painful. And the more I do this work and the more I evolve as a soul, the less room for error I have. So that what was once a very small thing in terms of conscience, I would easily overlook. It would be overridden by thought. It would be overridden by the self. And I would ignore it. Now, even the smallest deviation causes me great suffering with my wife, a tone of voice, which causes her to be hurt. Even that small a thing is unbearable to me until I correct my course. Conscience is the will of God in each of us, but it must be developed, it must evolve, and it must be evolving to the point where it becomes the force which drives my behavior on a daily basis.
So when you say conscience suffers, you mean the suffering inside of you?
That's correct. And you know, to take it even further, what is it that suffers? Conscience suffers. What is conscience? Conscience is the will of God. So my behavior causes this so-called God to suffer in me.
Yeah.
I must evolve to the point where I pick up my own cross and carry it. So I do not require that God, whatever God is, carry my cross for me. I take responsibility for my life, for my behavior, and I pick up my own cross, my own suffering, and I carry it myself. I take responsibility for my life, and when conscience is guiding me, conscience then becomes the thing which I pay attention to, which I follow. The moment conscience is awakened. Sorry.
No. I mean, I'm just thinking. I mean, it's interesting because it comes in, I guess, in a sneaky sort of way. I mean, I notice that, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and need to correct something that I would never need to correct before,
Yeah.
And
yes.
And then I'm sure I know there's a gajillion things that, of course, I'm missing, but it really is amazing. Like, I've had a couple of pretty profound experiences when I look back and say, holy cow, like I caught this behavior in myself and I made it right, or I did what I could do to make it right. And I never would have done that before. I would have stewed about how it was okay that I behaved that way because blah, 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 blah. And
two things that conscience requires of me over and over again, which are very difficult for the self, for what we call the self to do. One is to apologize, and the second is to forgive. So conscience is an active force in me which compels me to apologize when I've erred and to forgive others when they have erred.
It's so
it led me eventually to forgive my mother and father, who were terribly damaged human beings. To forgive my mother and father was a great ongoing, it wasn't a once and done thing. It took me many years to not only forgive my mother and father, but to bow down before them and bless them and thank them for what they gave me, which for most of my life appeared to be a terrible thing they'd given me. It became eventually a thing which still helps me right now as I speak.
And it's not thought. It's not, you can't get there from thinking about what's the right thing to do.
Thinking is not the way. Thinking won't get me there. Thinking is from the mammal mind, and thinking is not the thing that gets me to conscience. It's feeling.
Yeah, it's that remorse.
Yeah, it's that remorse.
And speak to the difference, though, because I think this is important. Speak to the difference between remorse and guilt.
Great. That's a wonderful, wonderful distinction. Guilt comes from external sources. Guilt comes from morality. Guilt blames. Guilt says you are wrong. Guilt says you are not good. Guilt is from the past, always, and it differs from society to society and person to person. Conscience never says you are wrong. Conscience only suffers when I deviate from love. It doesn't condemn. Guilt is always from an external source. Conscience is always only internal. Guilt is associated with shame.
Right.
Conscience doesn't shame. Guilt shames. Conscience only suffers remorse.
Why do you say that guilt is the past and what is remorse is happening? Guilt is from the past. Remorse is not from the past. How does that?
Remorse is always from a present phenomenon only. It's in the present. It is a feeling in the body, in the present. Guilt comes from the mind. Remorse comes from the heart.
Okay. You said, one of the first things you said, and I was going to ask you about this, is, don't believe anything you say. You've got to test it out for yourself. And the first thing that you talked about was how we're in this mammal body and we follow a herd. And you said it like that is the truth. And I can imagine that some people would really bristle at that and say, I don't follow a herd. I make my own. I mean, almost everybody, right? I make my own decisions. I'm not following anyone. How would someone test that out, as you suggest? and not take your word for it? How do they, someone who's not, doing this, how do you test that out? How do you find out that you're just following a herd?
Yeah, this is really good. So I'm like everyone else. I'm driven by opinions and belief systems. So the first thing that one is required to do in this work is to question my own beliefs. What do I believe? And where did it come from? I believe X. How is it that I happen to believe X? Where did that come from? And what I begin to see is that I am my mother and my father, for example. I am whoever my caregiver was as a child. I mirror them. I am following their lead. Do I act alone or do I seek out company? Do I seek out company that believes the same things I believe? Or do I act completely alone without any need for company? Well, the mammal always seeks company. It always seeks company of its own kind. So I begin to look at who I seek to hang with. What do they believe? Do I hang only with Republicans, for example, or only with Democrats, only with Baptists, only with Catholics, only with Jews, only with white people, only with black people, only with Americans, only, you see, the herd, the identification with the herd gets very large. It may be I come from New York City, I'm a New Yorker, or I come from Arkansas, I'm an Arkie, or I come from America, I'm an American. This herd is whatever group I identify with. And okay, so let's say I'm a rebel, I'm a loner. I identify with other rebels and loners. And when I meet a rebel, a loner, a lone wolf, there is a common denominator, and we tend to identify with one another and seek each other's company. So I begin to notice what attracts me. What do I identify with? And that becomes an indication of the mammal mind seeking out its own kind.
Which is maybe also hard to identify because one would say, well, this is where I feel at home.
Yeah. This is where I feel the most welcome. This is, I have this feel of belonging here. And if I'm old or even if I live all alone, it may be the television. It may be my computer. It may be my smartphone. But I seek out those things which are agreeable to me. And then I begin to notice what is attracting me. What do I identify with? Because the problem, Abby, for everyone, every soul, the problem is identification.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. Talk about identification.
Okay. I'm going to read a quote. This is a quote from G.W. Goodwin. G.W. Goodwin is a mystery to me. When I was much younger, 25 years ago, I discovered G.W. Goodwin online in chat rooms about the work. I had no idea who he was, but I had the presence of mind to begin to print off the talks he was giving. And I can't find him anymore. He's disappeared completely. But this is what he says about identification. This is a quote. The way out of identification begins in self-observation. Long observation of identification can begin the awakening of conscience, and conscience can awaken the will to intervene and stop identification. Unquote. And this is from Mr. Gurdjieff. Quote, identifying is the chief obstacle to self-remembering. Unquote. So, I am identified with what? Well, the first thing I'm identified with is my thoughts.
Right.
I believe it is me thinking. I am not my thoughts, and I believe I am. Second, I'm identified with my emotions. I believe those emotions are me, and I'm identified with them. I am not my emotions. I am not my thoughts, and I am not this mammal body. I am in this mammal body. There is a relationship. It should be a very clear and loving relationship in which I, that is the soul, is the active force, and the mammal and all its desires and urges is the passive force. The body becomes a willing servant to serve the will of the soul, which is the will of God.
But instead, we're serving the mind, right?
I'm identified with the thought. And I do whatsoever the thought says because I think it's me thinking.
Right. I think it's me that this is how I individuate. My thought is who I am and what separates me from you. And so I follow that thought.
What thinks the thinker is the memory function of the neocortex. It's the memory function which thinks in mammals. And the memory function always operates from the past, from the known. Love operates from the present only and is completely unknown. So it's never the same twice. Love is always a present phenomenon. Thought is always a past phenomenon only. It cannot be otherwise because it's a memory function. The memory is the storehouse of the past. What thinks is the memory function.
Yeah, let's
not love. The mind can't love.
The mind can't. Yeah, let's break this down a little because this is. I think this is so important. When you talk about the memory function and put those two things together, elaborate a little bit on that because any thought that we have, I think what you're saying, comes from a memory of the past that's been stored, either in physically in a somatic sense or in an intellectual sense, and we can only think in the context of what we remember or of what actually happened or the story of what we created of what's happened. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, memory is stored in three ways. One, it's stored in the memory function of the neocortex as thought. Two, it's stored in the emotional center as emotion. Three, it's stored in the musculature as muscle memory. So my body is full of tensions of all kinds. Those tensions, those muscular tensions, are stored memories being held, not allowed to be processed, passed through, and transformed. And so as we age, the body becomes bent and the joints become stiff and the body assumes this shape, which is the shape of the personal history of the mammal stored in the musculature, in the skeletal structure itself, in the mind, in the emotions. So when I think, the mind has its place. The mind is a valuable tool when it's used consciously. Conscious thinking is when I call upon the mind for basically three functions. One, to solve technical problems. The mind is excellent at solving technical problems. For example, how do I get from here to point B? I go from point A to point B, the mind directs me. Solving technical problems. How do I tie my shoes? How do I fix this meal? The mind is an excellent tool when called upon by the being, and I'm calling the soul a being, by the being for information. It's stored information. Two, the mind is excellent for communication. For example, I am speaking to you. I have to use language. Mind is the storehouse of language. So mind is an excellent form of communication of a certain kind that is verbal. There are other kinds of communication which are much more direct. There is a feeling communication which passes between people without words. It's very strong and it's very potent, and we believe it. There is a communication over long distances. I'm on one side of the world and you're on the other, and yet we have a direct line of communication. I feel you. There is a communication with those who have died.
Right.
We say that I feel her presence. This is a real thing because love has no boundary. Love has no time. Love is not subject to space or time. And so it's possible via that feeling of love from the heart to communicate with those who have died, with those who are long distance from us, etc. But that's different than thinking. Thinking, so solving technical problems, communication, and the third thing mind is good for is remembering. There's a need for memory. I have this practice, this spiritual practice, self-remembering, self-observation. Self-remembering means the mind remembers the practice. The moment the mind remembers the practice to come back to my body, to embody attention in breath and sensation, now the mind needs to be quiet.
Yeah.
And the being embodied in breath and sensation is present and begins to act from what the present requires, not what the past requires, but what is required in the present moment.
And what you say, one of the things you say in self-observation is that the mind is how did you say it? Thought is really a terrible way to run your life.
Well, thought is a cruel master. It is a valuable servant, but it is a cruel master. And I can tell you, most of my life I was lost in thought. Thought was the way, I call it my chief weakness. The chief weakness, its function is to mask the chief feature, to hide the chief feature. My way of operating in the world was through thought, because my thinking function was smart. And there was a lot of times when I thought I was the smartest person in the room, and it got me through. It got me through grade school, high school, through college. It got me a PhD, Dr. Moore. It got me through a long series it got me through my childhood, which was a hellish childhood. I retreated to imagination, and the mind is excellent in imagination. And there's a right imagination, which would be to prepare myself. We've just been through Christmas and the holidays. That means many of us are with our families, and it's often very difficult to be with my family. And there's often very many old grudges. All right, so imagination can prepare me to meet my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my uncle, my cousin. It can prepare me. I can visualize how I wish to respond instead of the old reactivity. So that's that's conscious use of the mind.
Okay.
The old way would be the mind says, here's sister, and she betrayed me, she stole my boyfriend, and I'll never forgive her. That's wrong use of imagination.
Yeah.
So the mind has a function. The mind is not the enemy. The mind and the body is not the enemy. The body is a precious instrument. When I begin to use it consciously, not driven by the mammal's behavior and doing what the mammal says. Goodwin's quote, conscience can awaken the will to intervene and stop identification. So the mind says, so-and-so just called me a so-and-so. Well, all right, and I retaliate. Well, conscience, if I can have a moment, if I can find my breath, find my body, sense my body, relax my body, I have that moment in which conscience can speak in that gap. And I can respond with loving kindness. And the mind says you can't be using loving kindness everywhere. That's insane. You'll be destroyed. Well, loving kindness doesn't mean that I allow myself to be victimized. Loving kindness means that whenever there is abuse, I stop the abuse. How? Well, one way is to remove myself from the source. Another way is to speak up for myself, not against the other person. To speak for myself, not pointing my finger in blame. Loving kindness. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the great Tibetan master, had this quote, which guides me in my life. This is the quote: "If kindness doesn't work, try more kindness," unquote.
I find this super, super hard for
it's hard.
A lot of, I mean, it's hard to do for sure. But it's even hard for people that wrap their head around, because it will, for many, many, many people, I'm sure listening, it will ultimately come back to, even though you just said it, even though you just clarified, it does not mean that you are, quote, letting people get away with things, or you allow yourself to be abused. You just said that. And I know that many people listening will take this thinking, oh, this is to the nth degree. Like, well, I guess I just can't stand up for myself, or I guess this means I'm just supposed to be loving, kind, no matter what's happening to me. And it's a hump that I see over and over again that people have a really hard time getting around with in two ways. One, either they become the doormat and allow themselves to get abused because they think that's, quote, right. Or the other side of things, which is like, well, no, you can't just do that forever. You can't just say, at some point you have to stand up for yourself.
So what I've just said, first of all, is incomprehensible to the mind.
Mm-hmm.
If loving kindness, look, that good master Jesus said, in place of all law, one law: love God, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, my dear friend Tom Logan, one of my oldest friends in the world, is the head of Marion Medical Mission in Illinois. They go to Africa and build shallow wells so that native tribal people have clean drinking water. One of Tom's main messages is, when you pray, move your feet. All right, so loving kindness, when Jesus says love your neighbor as yourself, it's not enough as a theory. I have to act. What is loving kindness? Well, loving kindness is difficult when somebody insults me or assaults me. When somebody assaults me physically, I stop them. I defend and protect myself, but I don't kill them. If somebody is abusive to me verbally, I make a stand for myself, not against them, but for my dignity. If they continue and won't stop, I remove myself from their company. I won't stand to be, unless abuse is my love language. Everyone has a wounded child, which is what the chief feature is. It's a wounded child. And that wounded child lives at the emotional center. And I'm not talking about an actual child. I'm talking about an energetic configuration based on the personal history, which becomes this childlike reactivity. For every person, they have a wounded child in them. That wounded child has a love language, a language by which it identifies as love. For me, my wounded child's love language is food. For others, it may be abuse. They identify love with abuse because that's what their caregiver gave them as love, was abuse. And that's why many people who are abused won't leave, because they believe that this is where love is. For many, it's money, sex, power, fame, drugs, many, many kinds of love language. But the point is that conscience always points towards real love, non-judgmental love. And it shows me what is the proper response in every situation. And it may differ from situation to situation. It's always pointing towards love, but love is not weak. Love is not a victim. Love is not an aggressor. Love is a being. It is a stance. It is a state. And that state is dignified. It is divine. It will not tolerate being abused. It will always make a stand for love. And so let's get really practical. What is objective love? Present attention is objective love. Present attention is objective love. In order to give objective love to the person in front of me, I have to bring present attention to them. All mammals identify attention as love. All young mammals they require the attention of the herd leader periodically. They act to get the attention of the herd leader, and when the herd leader turns and looks at them, gives them their complete attention, they feel safe and secure. They can go on about their business. For all mammals, attention and love are the same thing. Present attention is objective love. That means it requires nothing in return. It has no agenda. It has no need for reciprocation. Present attention is objective love. Love without a motive.
It's reminding me of a passage in your book, Self-Observation, when you say unconditional love, which is conscious love, operates not under mechanical law, but under the law of conscious behavior. It comes from higher centers and is an act of grace. It is the creator entering fully, lawfully, and by invitation only into the human biological instrument. And you say a little later, real love has boundaries. Fear has none. I thought this was really so just resonates. Real relationship operates within very clear and agreed upon boundaries. Failure to honor those boundaries means the relationship cannot endure. Period. End of story. Boundaries in relationship are not arbitrary or secretive, known only to me. They are mutually agreed upon limits to my behavior, which I willingly enter into because I am committed to the relationship enduring long term. What takes place in most relationships where two people claim their undying love for one another is two people operating without agreed upon mutually acceptable boundaries in a relationship in which there is no commitment, only what I want, when I want it, and how I want it. This is an infantile emotional level of relationship. It is how babies wish to be treated by their mothers. It is the result of small, selfish eyes, which we'll get into in a moment, having their moment, entering into a relationship, and then disappearing. Breakdown and breakup are inevitable result of small eyes in relationship. Unconscious beings make mechanical choices and suffer endlessly.
That's brilliant. I wish I'd said that.
You did. You did say that.
That's absolutely crystal clear.
Yeah.
Most people operate in relationship on an infantile level. Me, me, me. And only you when you satisfy what me wants. And when you don't meet me's needs, then one of two things happens. There's conflict in relationship and war all the time, or I end the relationship and move on to the next person who will give me what I want.
So I have a question. How, because I think that this is something that, we often struggle with. How do I know? How do we know when we are operating out of that conscience and when we're not? Like, so for example, if someone, let's say someone listening is having, is really in a tough spot in their relationship and they're trying to figure out, is this me having small eyes and being selfish and not thinking of this other person enough? Or is this a place that I'm not able to have my needs met? How do you know? And this is part of why I really formed this podcast and called it the Intuition Incubator, because I think it's so hard sometimes to know. Because I think of what you're talking about personally, and I'm going to ask you later what your thought is, but I think of part of that is intuition, is conscience. It's all that, the God within, and tapping into that. And how do you know if you actually are tapping into that conscience or you're not? Does that make sense?
Well, it's a wonderful question. So I want to talk about relationship for a moment. In real relationship, in adult relationship, in conscious relationship, two people learn to talk about their feelings. And if I'm a man, this is the most difficult possible thing, because men are not taught to talk about their feelings.
Yeah.
Men are taught not to feel. The only thing most men are allowed to feel is anger or fear.
Mm.
And most men don't have a language for their feelings. They are feeling illiterate. And they have to learn from women. Women have a very, very broad, deep, subtle feeling vocabulary. And this is most women now, not all women.
Right.
So a man who is intelligent, who is wise, who wishes to evolve as a being, begins to see that he has a lot to learn from women about feelings. And slowly, the man gets over his fear of talking, of feeling, and begins to recognize the variety of feelings that he has in him, and begins to be willing not to clam up, not to be the strong, silent type, which is our model for what a man is, which is all wrong. It's a lie. It's the death of love. He learns to speak about his feelings, not pointing his finger at the other and blaming, but saying, when this happens, this is how I feel. When you do that, I feel this. Not requiring that the other change, but only that the other understand, this is how I feel. All right, that's mature, that's evolved, that's conscious relationship. When unconscious relationship says, you make me feel, victim position. If the other can make me feel a certain way, I am in the victim position. Unconscious, mammal, childlike behavior. When you do this, I feel this. This is taking responsibility for my feelings. It's not blaming you. So, what does conscience say? When conscience is the guiding force in relationship, the first thing that happens in the relationship is a certain respect develops between two people. I begin to respect certain things about this woman, my wife. Wow, she's really good at. Wow, I love when she does this. This is beautiful. I love, and I begin to respect her. Respect then leads me to want to talk when there is difficulty, when there's any problem. Whenever there is a conflict in relationship, the conflict is always between two eyes, two dreams. Conscience doesn't have a conflict. Conscience always goes to the heart and is clear on what's needed. So when my wife says, when you speak to me in that tone of voice, I feel, conscience immediately feels remorse in me. And I want to correct my course because I adore my wife. All right, so respect leads to mutual admiration. I begin to admire my wife. I admire what's best in her, what's good in her, her goodness, her strengths. And I begin to see not her weaknesses, but her strengths, conscience. And admiration evolves to devotion. Over time, I become devoted to my wife. So that I would want to do anything to keep this relationship alive, whatever is required. Devotion eventually evolves in a loving relationship, in a conscious relationship. Devotion becomes adoration. Adoration is divine.
Yeah, but what you're saying, sorry to interrupt,
No, go ahead.
That what I'm thinking might be being thought is, okay, doing anything it takes to keep this relationship alive could mean translating into, I'm going to subjugate myself. And
yes, I'm going to make myself into whatever pleases him.
Right. And that, yes. So explain how that, because I don't think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's mechanical love. That's childish. That's infantile love. It doesn't mean that I bend myself into a pretzel in order to please him. It means that I stand for my dignity and my inherent goodness. Always, I stand for my inherent goodness and dignity. And when that's violated, I say so. I say, when you do this, I feel. All right, so let's say that behavior doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm.
If it's abusive and doesn't stop, I withdraw to an appropriate distance so that the abuser is no longer afraid and abuses me. It may be that we separate. It may be that we go our separate. It doesn't mean I stop loving. It means that I stop placing myself in a position of victim. And this may be very difficult. What we're talking about now is very problematic. Here's a woman with 2 children. She depends on her husband for her livelihood to support, and yet this man is abusive. How can I separate and support my children and myself? But you see, I have to have help. I can't do it all by myself. But this is very far. This is not the normal relationship we're talking about. We're talking about an aberration. When we talk about normal relationship, when that person hurts me and I say so, that hurts my feelings when you talk to me that way. I feel that you don't love me when you speak that way. In a normal adult relationship, that statement will bring about a radical shift in behavior because there is 1, respect, 2, admiration, 3, devotion, and eventually adoration. And when adoration happens, it happens between two people. Both adoration attracts adoration. Like attracts like. When I adore the woman, that adoration gets returned because that's the law of adoration. So that when whatever violates that adoration in the relationship, both people feel it, and they feel it immediately, and they can't rest until there is a resolution. My wife and I use the begin again practice. So I'm going to talk about that for a minute, Abby, may I?
Yes, please.
The begin again practice works like this. Both people in the relationship agree beforehand that whenever there's a rupture in the adoration of any kind, even the smallest kind, whichever person has the courage and integrity and strength to say immediately, can we begin again? The agreement is the other person immediately, without question, says yes. They touch each other. It may be just holding hands. If the violation has been severe, that may be all they can muster to begin with. Or if it's small, they embrace, they hold each other, but they touch. It grounds the charge. And then they sit down and they talk about their feelings. And they get back to adoration very quickly then, because they both recognize that is the most beautiful thing in my life, is this adoration. And I want to do whatever it takes to restore it. Conscience always restores relationship. Fear always divides relationship. So conscience is always looking at how to restore. And it may be that the only way to restore this relationship is if we're very far apart. You're in one town, I'm in another. You understand what I'm saying? But that has to be how I operate. I operate from common sense, from a position of dignity and divine dignity.
And I, as I'm listening, we're all circling back now to self-observation, because the only way to really get to that place, for example, if you're in a tough spot in your relationship where you maybe want to be able to do that, but your partner is not responding in kind, the only way, I think I'm answering my own question by listening to you talk, is that when you observe yourself enough and you observe a process enough and you are confident that you are functioning from that conscience, from that part of love. I mean, this is what I speak with people about. That's when the clarity comes in about whether this is or is not the relationship for you, because it doesn't necessarily have to be an abusive relationship. Sometimes it's just someone isn't feeling like they're getting their needs met in the relationship. But it's very hard to determine whether you're getting your needs met, whether it's you or whether it's the other person, when you are reactive or you are, not operating from that place of conscience or loving kindness. And if you have an extended period over which you are responding that way, you're able to evaluate what's really happening. And then I think you're tapping into that conscience, and then there's a knowing. There's an inner knowing, and it's not so much like thinking. Is this me? Is it them? You know what I'm saying?
It's clarity. It's objective. Yeah. Look, let's get really basic here. All humans have only two needs. What do you think they are?
Love.
Yes.
And you mean physical needs? Love and acceptance? Or love and...
All humans have two needs, to love and to be loved.
To love and to be loved.
Period. All humans have the same two needs. What we call love is the problem. Because for many of us, the love language is the language of that wounded child. In my case, it's food. In other people, it may be argument. It may be abuse. It may be money, sex, drugs, power, fame.
So you mean when you have those things, you feel loved?
That's what they have to feel that they're loved. So for most people, love is attraction. That's what they call love. The law of attraction is very strong in mammals, and most people confuse attraction with love. It's not the same thing. Attraction depends on proximity, on type, and on electrical polarity in the body. Here's what I mean by that. The law of attraction works on proximity. That means we have to be close we have to see one another. Oh, across the room, he's attractive. I want to go stand by him and meet him. I want to see more about him. Proximity. 2, type. What do I mean by type? I mean by type, body type. Ectomorph, mesomorph, ectomorph, endomorph, mesomorph. Body type. What does body type depend on? Well, if I'm a man, mostly it depends on what my mother's body type was. And it depends on her emotional type as well. If I'm a woman, it depends on my father's body type, my father's emotional type. Whatever my most important caregiver was, that type I'm identified with that shape. So proximity, type, and polarity. What does polarity mean? It means that all bodies are electrochemical instruments. All bodies have a charge. All electrical machines have a charge. If my charge in my machine at any given moment is the opposite of your charge at any given moment, the law of electrical attraction is opposites attract. Positive, and if you put 2 positive poles together in a magnet, they repel. You have to turn one end around so the positive and the negative are attracted and they bond. If at any given moment my charge is different from yours and your type is what I like, and we are close to each other, we're going to be attracted to each other, and people call that love. They call sexual attraction love. They call physical attraction love. They call romantic attraction or emotional attraction love, and it doesn't last, because at any given moment, the charge in me may change according to weather, according to mood, according to the conditions and circumstances. And the moment that charge changes, I'm not attracted to her anymore. The body type changes over age, right? And what attracted to me as a young cheerleader, she's not that. She's 45 years old, and look at her breasts sag down, and she's fat around the middle, and I'm not attracted. I have to go with my secretary, And so you see, attraction is what everyone in this culture calls love, and we learn it from movies. We learn about romantic love. We learn about it from books and TV and the computer and the cell phone. But sexual love, it's all attraction. It's not love.
Right.
Love is not a feeling. Love is a commitment and a practice. And the feeling may not be there. It may be there. It may not. It's not always there. Sometimes I don't feel it. But if it's my commitment of my life and my practice on a daily basis, I do it even when I don't feel it. And sometimes I feel it, and it's easy. Sometimes I don't feel it, and it's hard. But this is Goodwin, conscience can awaken the will to intervene and stop identification.
Yes.
The intervention is the being, conscious being, stopping that which hurts.
Yes. May I read your poem, Love is Not a Feeling?
I'd love for you to.
Love is not a feeling. It is a commitment etched in stone. But belief in the feeling sends us reeling. From one failure to another, we end up alone, broken and cynical. Love is not a feeling. It is a reliable daily practice. No matter what I feel, I am not concealing it, but letting it be. She may be prickly as cactus and not at all easy on the eye. The feeling may be disgust, or let us say she is most lovely, and the feeling is lust. Both turn to dust. Still, the commitment to practice is steady, doesn't depend on whether I'm feeling ready. It's exactly what you just said. Yeah.
That's an important poem.
Yeah.
Because you see, when my aim in life, according to the work,
Yep.
is to do what conscience says, then it doesn't matter what you do. And of course, there's limits to this. Absolutely. But it doesn't depend on the other. So there's a kind of scale, there's a kind of evolutionary process that happens with the being once the being begins to engage in this work. The work to be present, because love is a present phenomenon only. Love is not from the past. Everything's dead there. Love is not from the future. Everything is dead. Nothing is alive yet there. Love is a present phenomenon only. So present attention is objective love. What happens as I practice over many years, and because this is called the work, it's not called the play, it's conscious labor.
No kidding.
So what happens is, I move from the position of the infant is me only. And that's the position of most human beings. That's the survival position of the mammal, me only. I love you, but if it comes to a choice between me and you, bye-bye. Me only.
Okay, before you go on though, I got a question about that. Because what do you say then to someone who will say, but I'm a pleaser. I am always thinking about someone else. It's never me. It's not me only. It's always the other people. That's the problem. I give too much.
Pleasing is your chief feature.
And
what that means is pleasing is survival driven, and it's all about me.
Yeah. So pleasing, the way, this is kind of how I look at it, and you tell me, what you think, but when we're pleasing, or we, have that part that is habitually pleasing, to me, the reason that the person is pleasing is to calm their own anxiety about someone else being upset.
Yes.
And when they can recognize that, then you can see very clearly it's really not about the other person. It is still about you. Yes?
It's always fear driven.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is an important point.
It's always about, I'm afraid to lose love if I don't please.
Yeah. I really want listeners to hear this because, sometimes things are said that, maybe is taken for granted, but someone's listening and they're saying, well, that's not me. It's not always about me. But I think it is so important when we're talking about self-observation to be able to say, well, hey, if you're a chronic giver and you're always in victimhood and you're always feeling like you're coming up short, we can guarantee, if you do your own thing and you test it out, look at it yourself and see what is the motivator behind all of that giving. And we will find, and there's no shame in it, right? That's just how we're built. We will find that, it comes back to some fear that I have inside myself, that I'm doing these things for me, to protect me. And that's just how it is. It's not good, not bad.
You're right to say there's no shame in it. There is no shame in anything that I have done or been as a person growing in this world. There is no shame in any of it. I did what I had to do as a child in order to survive. And it worked.
Right.
But now I'm an adult and it no longer serves. So I begin to observe what doesn't work anymore in me. And self-observation is a self-correcting mechanism. I don't have to change anything that I observe. I don't judge what I observe. I don't try to change it. I just watch, like wind and water on stone. Slowly, slowly, wind and water wear away stone. The ego structure, which calls itself me, I, is there for a very important reason. It's not the enemy. It is a food source for the being to grow and evolve. The ego can only operate in the dark. It cannot stand to be seen. If I see it, I don't have to be it. So if I watch patiently, often enough, my behavior comes to light. To shine a light on that behavior is to bring it out of the darkness and into conscious awareness. Eventually, I begin to see that that behavior does not suit me. It doesn't bring me what I want, which is to love and be loved.
Thanks for listening. If you found what you heard useful, share it with someone you love. Podcasts like the Intuition Incubator, while ranking in the top 5%, thrive on your support. Like the episode, leave a 5-star review, show up on YouTube at The Conscious Edge, and comment with your newfound wisdom, suggestions for future episodes, but most of all, so we can be in this together. Until next time.